Hello there, you're watching the Press Preview, our first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. Over the next half an hour, we're going to be talking about the headlines with the consultant editor of the Daily Mail, Andrew Pearce, and the associate editor of the Daily Mirror, Kevin Maguire. So good evening to both of you. Lovely to see you both.
Fantastic to see you, Anna.
So let's take a look then at what's making the front pages. And the Daily Telegraph hears that parents will be asked to test their secondary school-age children for COVID-19 twice a week at home in an effort to ensure schools can stay open. The Guardian points out that although infection rates have fallen significantly, children are now the group spreading the virus most widely. The Metro understands young adult volunteers will be paid £4,500 to take part in a study in which they'll be deliberately infected with coronavirus to test the effectiveness of new vaccines. The Mirror reports on Boris Johnson's promise that lockdown will be lifted cautiously and in stages. That story is also on the front of the Express, with the Prime Minister saying decisions will be based on data. The Daily Mail says Mr Johnson is coming under increasing pressure to lift the lockdown more quickly. And the Financial Times reports that the UK's former chief Brexit negotiator, Lord Frost, is to join the Cabinet as a minister responsible for overseeing the country's relationship with the EU. So Andrew Pearce and Kevin Maguire here to take us through some of those headlines. And Andrew, you picked out Kevin's paper, first of all, very generous of you, the Daily Mirror. Their headline there, Small Steps to Normal Life, reflecting what the Prime Minister was talking about today, about easing lockdown in stages, this real sense that caution is the watchword.
Yeah, it's caution all the time. The language the Prime Minister is using is in stark contrast to the language he used last year when everything was going to be world-beating. It's going to be a world-beating test and trace system. It was actually third-rate. The world-beating test and trace app that didn't even work. So now the language has changed, the whole approach has changed. I think he was always wanted to be cautious, but there is a natural tendency in Boris Johnson to talk boosterism, to be enthusiastic, to want to please. So this is all about managing expectations, in my view, Anna. A lot of scientists giving evidence to MPs today saying we could come out of lockdown more rapidly than we did the first time round because the data is much better. But the Prime Minister is going to be quite clear about this, and I think he's right. This can be this has to be the last lockdown. If we come out and then went back in, that would not just be a political failure, it would be the death of the economy, it would be catastrophic for the country as a whole. So that's why I think there is caution. And although some of us might think, come on, Prime Minister, this is when we need you to be a bit bolder, a bit more radical, I think if you looked at the opinion polls, most of those suggest people are with him. They don't want us to go too quickly if they think it's going to take any risks with the nation's health.
Well, yes, and Kevin, tonight our Deputy Political Editor Sam Coates has seen some Whitehall documents with a plan for coming out of lockdown. We don't know whether that's the plan that the Prime Minister will end up adopting, but that suggests a relatively rapid moving out of lockdown. Talks about schools going back in March, further education perhaps mid-April, late April hospitality venues and leisure facilities. That's part of this plan that he's seen. Lots of talk about what might happen. Will we find out in detail, do you think, on Monday, or do you think the Prime Minister is likely to be still quite vague when he makes that announcement?
I think there'll be a lot of caveats and qualifications and vagueness, but given he is, as Andrew said, he's normally into this boosterism. You wonder if he's being sedated or there's a body double taking his place, or is he playing a game in that he is deliberately lowering expectations now so he can pull something out next week after, early April, and say, look, thanks to my great efforts, said your great sacrifices, but he means my great efforts, then we can do more than I expected. So he creates a sense of excitement. But in the past, he always overpromised and it ended up in disaster. At the beginning in March, that lockdown, 12 weeks, he thought he'd change it. Well, we know where we ended up. Then it was going to be by Christmas back to normal. Then at Christmas, he's having to rip up his own plans for a kind of free for all because the virus was letting rip. So it is a very different tone from him today. But again, as Andrew said, scientists, epidemiologists, professors, people who know what they were talking about were queuing up really to MPs and saying, look, you can ease lockdown. There was an Edinburgh University epidemiologist who was saying, look, you can go to the beach. You might have seen all those pictures of crowded beaches or apparently crowded beaches last summer caused an outcry, but no evidence there was any transmission because it's out of doors. So I do wonder, he will have to caveat it and he will have to be guarded, but involve people in a big national conversation. Just say, look, if this happens, we can do that. And of course it's going to be, you can't just say you have a roadmap and we'll stick to it. If all of a sudden infections go up, hospitalizations go up and deaths go up. But the vaccination does seem to have changed the game, and that light at the end of the tunnel is getting brighter and is getting nearer.
Well, yes, and let's move on to the Daily Telegraph as well, Andrew, shall we? Their headline says parents to test children for COVID twice a week. And testing does seem to be key to the government's plans for opening up, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, good luck with that, because they're talking about parents testing twice a week their children with these rapid flow tests. Well, I've had a couple of those. They're pretty damned unpleasant. It involves something which looks like a knitting needle stuck up your nostrils, or you can have a throat swab. The ones up your nostrils is potentially dangerous if you don't get it right. And if you remember, one of Gavin Williamson, the Education Secretary for now, one of his more bird-brained ideas was that all teachers were going to have to test children when they went back to school after the Christmas break. As if you recall, they went back to school for one solitary day. And that all fell apart because the watchdog body said it wasn't appropriate. I think there'll be some parents who'll be very reluctant about this. How will we know they've done them? But you can see why they're going for this, because they think testing is the answer. They want to, and also that will help reassure teachers who are very anxious, of course, that they may be infected by kids who don't. If you see them out and about in streets, and I know what the experts are saying to MPs today, you're much less likely to catch the infection outdoors, just as well, because if you see a group of teenagers, they're all congregating together.
Does this idea of testing either for pupils, I think they're talking about secondary school pupils in this case, but also for some workers to be able to return and for some other industries to help open up, does this idea of mass testing make sense to you, Kevin?
It does, as a principle, and it should have been pursued rather earlier rather than abandoned in March or April. And 22 billion has been spent on a test and trace system which is badged as NHS but isn't. It's run by private companies, and it's been pretty much a sort of fatal waste of money. But no, regular testing alongside vaccinations is the way forward. But parents are going to find it very difficult. I too have had one of these lateral flow tests. They're not entirely reliable. They're not as reliable as the PCR tests where your sample goes off to a laboratory. They're more, like the, pregnancy test, or they're not as accuracy as a pregnancy test. But it's very difficult. I was going to go on holiday, and I went and paid my 150 quid, didn't get on holiday in the end. The Prime Minister changed the rules, I couldn't go. But it is very painful getting the swab stuck up your nose properly and down your throat in order to get an accurate sample. And I think many parents just won't be able to do it, or won't do it properly. And it shouldn't be teachers. If you're going to do this properly, you've got to recruit and train testers who will go to schools and go to workplaces. You can't just have DIY tests, people doing it themselves, or parents trying to do it on little Johnny or Jenny. That won't work. But it's a good idea, but it's how you implement it, and that's what will be most important. OK, and turning to The Guardian, Andrew, more information coming in all the time on the effect of lockdown and potentially the effect of vaccination, though hopefully that will become clearer when the government shares some of their data. But what's The Guardian saying about what the latest figures suggest?
Well, this is the figures coming out of Imperial, who are in the thick of all of this, suggesting that more and more children are now spreaders. Now, of course, that's a cause for concern, as we know that the government is intent that schools will reopen on March the 8th. Now, I was under the impression that it would be staggered, it would be primary school children first, but this report on the front page of The Guardian saying it is primary school children who are spreading it the most. So this is going to be problematic, and this could be why the government is saying that parents are going to have to test children. I think it's going to be even more problematic. I mean, I would struggle to do one of these rapid flow tests on somebody. Imagine if you're a mum or a dad and you're doing it with your primary school child age 6 or 7. That is not going to be easy, and it's fraught. But it's another problem that the government's going to have to get to grips with.
Do you think is that how you interpret it, Kevin? I mean, the opening paragraph here talks about COVID infections falling by 2/3 in a month in England, but the virus is now spreading most amongst primary age children and young people. I mean, is that a reflection on how much it's fallen in other age groups, or what? How do we interpret this?
Well, I think the proportion has gone up because it's fallen elsewhere, but it's also, I think this came out when schools were shut in England at the beginning of January, after the government, I think, rather foolishly was browbeating teachers and heads and local education authorities and saying you must reopen despite all the concerns being expressed. That kids were spreading it more than was acknowledged by the Prime Minister and the Education Secretary. Kids, they spread nits and flu between, or coughs and colds between each other. And any parent knows they bring them home. So that is always going to be a danger with coronavirus. But you want schools to reopen because it is so important on so many levels for kids and their future prospects. And it's not just what they learn, it's all that socialization and their mental health as well, and particularly kids in disadvantaged homes. So you want them to open, but we've got to acknowledge there is a risk. And there is a danger, and it's somehow got to be tackled. But these lateral floor tests are painful. They're very uncomfortable. They're not pleasant. So if Andrew needs one again, I'll do it to him.
Sure.
That's such a generous offer. He looks really grateful. I've only ever found them ticklish. Can I just say?
He'd use chopsticks. He'd use chopsticks from his Chinese takeaway.
OK, I'll let you discuss that during the break, and I'll tell you what's coming up after it. The UK's former chief Brexit negotiator lands himself a seat in the cabinet. We're going to be talking about that next. You're watching the press preview. With me tonight, Andrew Pearce and Kevin Maguire. And Andrew, we're starting with the front page of the FT next, aren't we? And their main headline focuses on Lord Frost, who we got to know the name a lot during Brexit negotiations, but he's got a new job.
Yeah, so he was the chief Brexit negotiator. He pulled off that deal, which people like Kevin Maguire said would never happen. The deal which was done with the EU on Christmas Eve or December the 23rd, whenever it was. He is now, he got his peerage out of it. He's now joining the cabinet as a Minister of State. Well, Minister of States aren't normally cabinet ministers, but he's going to have cabinet status. He's effectively, in my view, the whole Brexit department, which we had before, the Department for Exiting the European Union, is being recreated. And Frost is going to take on the big job of sorting out trade deals. He's going to have the poison chalice of sorting out the Northern Ireland Protocol, which is a complete mess. And there are other things to resolve with the European Union, such as equivalence in financial affairs, because the trade deal didn't deal with financial matters, which is a huge part of the British economy. And the FT is saying there's been a huge power struggle within the government. Well, maybe there has, maybe there hasn't. But if I was Michael Gove, who's been handling a lot of this, I think he'll be mighty relieved to be handing a lot of this over to David Frost. David Frost is deeply, deeply immersed in the detail, as is Gove, of course. Yeah. And he's a Brexiteer, a passionate Brexiteer, and I think he'll do a great job.
Yeah, the reward for failure is promotion to the cabinet and taking back control as an unelected peer in charge. Look, I never said there would be...
What about all the unelected peers in Labour's cabinet? All the unelected peers in Labour's cabinet. Mandelson, Lord Adonis.
Bad deal. You talk about all the problems, whether it's shellfish exporters going out of business or whether it's the Northern Ireland problem.
Blame the French.
Negotiated
Blame the French.
Oh, dear. Give me...
Blame the French. Blame Macron.
Charge who got it all wrong.
OK, I'm going to move you on. I'm thinking you're not going to find agreement on that one. Let's move on. And the Daily Telegraph has a picture of Prince Philip on its front page. He features on a number of them after the news that he's spending a second night in hospital tonight, Andrew. But Buckingham Palace has talked about it being precautionary, and we're told he's in good spirits.
Yeah, look, the words coming out of the palace are all very cautionary, but nobody can be terribly relaxed. A man of 99 going into hospital, particularly in days of COVID. You just have to think about the wonderful Captain Tom. He went into hospital with pneumonia, and sadly, we lost him. Now, Prince Philip would prefer, because we know what he's like, he's curmudgeonly and stubborn, he'd rather be anywhere tonight but in hospital for a second night. The reassuring thing is Her Majesty the Queen has stayed in Windsor Castle. If she was deeply concerned about him, I suspect she'd have moved to Buckingham Palace so she could be closer. And he's had no visitors so far, but we wish him well. He's 100 in June, and it would be great if he got there.
Indeed, and we all wish him well. Kevin, we are out of time. I know you're nodding and say that you agree with that. We know he doesn't like fuss. He probably wouldn't like the headlines either, would he? But we are going to leave it there. We're out of time, but I will see you both again at 11:30. Thank you for the moment, Kevin and Andrew.